Good day, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on the ASEAN Deep Tech Economy presented by SGInnovate. My name is Tuan from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization in Singapore that help build and scale deep tech innovations in artificial intelligence, medical robotics, quantum technologies across various industries. We invest in startups. We work with scientists, clinicians to help commercialize their research. We also build deep tech talent to prepare the future workforce for the startup deep tech economy that we are building today. And also importantly, we regularly engage with the deep tech innovation marketplace to raise the awareness and readiness of the market to adopt deep tech innovations. So today, we are going to talk about a trending topic in a very exciting region, deep tech in ASEAN. Noting out of our 200 plus registrations for today, about 80% of us coming from Southeast Asia and about 10% actually from Europe and another from Australia, New Zealand and other parts of Asia. It may be worthwhile to still have a quick outline of what makes ASEAN such a significant region in our world today. So together, ASEAN represents a geographical grouping of about 650 million people. In comparison, the European Union, with about 27 nation states, has 450 million people. And ASEAN as a joint economic community has always been a very open economy. We are home to about 220 of the world's largest companies. And we are also the fourth largest exporting region of the world, only after the EU, North America, and Greater China. But of course, I think we want to have this conversation today as natural and as engaging as possible. So please feel free to say hello with one another, share with us about your work in deep tech, as well as ask any questions that you would like to our esteemed panel of speakers today. You can also vote on each other's questions to highlight the ones that you particularly want to have answered. Right now, I would like to introduce our speakers who are joining us for this exciting conversation ahead. We have Dr. Poonaj, who also like to be referred to more endearingly as PAC, Executive Director at the National Innovation Agency of Thailand. Kimiko, who is the founder of Yellow Blocks, which is possibly the foremost deep tech community builder and ecosystem in Vietnam, and also an innovation leader at Vingroup, Vietnam's largest conglomerate to date. And we also have Dominic, Principal Investment Specialist at the Asian Development Bank. So without, I would like to have everyone join me as we welcome Pac, Kimiko, and Dominic to our session today. All right, Pac, Dominic, and Kimiko, thank you once again for being here. Let us start by inviting you to give a brief introduction about yourself and also to share with our audience a personal anecdote of your first encounter or experience with deep tech in any capacity that you may have. May we start with Pac, please?
Good morning. My Thai names may be very difficult to pronounce, Panat. That's better to call me Pat. In fact, my background, I used to be a nuclear physicist and astrophysicist. So in that sense, I have been encountered with so-called basic science or frontier science and deep technology for all of my working life. Recently, we started to support so-called research and technology organization to develop bridging between so-called research agencies and business, working on deep technology for the past 3 years. I will brief you later about the evolutions and the challenges that Thailand is facing before and after. No, not after, not yet. Before and when we are facing with a COVID-19 crisis and economic crisis. Thank you.
Thanks, Pac. I did not know that you were a nuclear physicist there. Definitely a very deep tech person on the panel today. Kimiko, could I invite you to share with us about yourself? Next, please. Well, it looks like Kimiko might have some audio issue at this point. Dominic, could I invite you to share with us next about yourself and the ADB, please?
Sure, thanks, Doran. Sorry, Kimiko, you're back on. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm really sorry, some network issue. So thank you for involving me, and thank you SGInnovate for creating this meaningful forum. So my name is Kimiko, and I'm from Vietnam. And actually, like my involvement with deep tech before it is named deep tech is actually 10 years ago when I studied in Helsinki University of Technology. And when I did my thesis, and how research can really, solutions and unimaginable problems that we have seen before. So for now, 2 years ago, I set up Yellow Blocks, which is one of the first deep tech ecosystem connector based in Vietnam and connecting on the whole ecosystem from government to corporate. And we built a system of more than 100 partners in 40 countries. And one of them is like our strategic partner, SGInnovate in the region. And recently, I also joined Green Group as the assistant to the chairman. So today,
Hey, Kimiko. I believe your internet connection might still have some issue. If you could hear us well, could you try to see whether there could be a better spot for you over there? But we did manage to hear about your story on deep tech, starting 10 years ago when you were in Helsinki, as well as the work with Yellow Blocks, building up a deep tech network of partners in over 40 countries. So that's always an amazing journey, and SGInnovate is happy to be a part of that. And Dominic, could I invite you to now share with our audience about your work, please?
Yeah, thanks, Doran. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dominic. I manage the ADB Ventures, which is the new investment venture platform of the Asian Development Bank that was launched earlier this year. My journey to get involved at ADB Ventures, prior to getting this set up in ADB, I was working in the Mekong region, managing a program called the Mekong Business Initiative that promoted entrepreneurship for impact in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam. So initially when I started these working with Incubator and setting up various programs with partners such as Saigon Innovation Hub, DNES and other partners in the region, we were focused very much on, of course, local entrepreneurs. But we also realized that a lot of the big development challenges of the region could not just be solved from harnessing local entrepreneurship. We also needed ways to attract global innovation into the region. But then we also realized that there were a lot of obstacles to these types of companies expanding in and working with corporates to address the big challenges that we faced. So out of that, we started to experiment and develop different types of corporate acceleration program where we tried to match innovators with local corporates in the region. We tried this with agriculture, with city governments, with banks and so forth. And I think we learned a lot from this journey. But of course, to build that ecosystem, you need corporates on the demand side, the innovators, but also funding and finance and at different stages. So that led me to ADB. And so then I've been working with ADB in the last year and a half to see how we could try and catalyze more funding for these types of technologies. And that's where I am now. So I'm looking forward to sharing more about ADB Ventures with you all in this morning's session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I can definitely see how each and everyone's unique backgrounds and your path to deep tech and innovation will be very, very insightful for our audience today. So let me start by asking this. At SGInnovate, we believe in the promise that deep tech could help to deliver practical solutions to our real-life problems. In fact, just last week, McKinsey highlighted 5 areas in which ASEAN economies could emerge stronger after the COVID-19 pandemic, which is something that I believe, Peg, you were just about to touch on during your introduction. And some of these 5 areas include advancing ASEAN as a manufacturing hub, investing in green growth, preparing our companies for a digital future, reskilling our workforce so that they are more future ready, as well as building high-value food industries. So in all of these areas, if not most, there's a role for deep tech innovation to actually be deployed and help make lives better. I would like to ask for your opinion on what you think are the most pressing area of needs in your countries and the region, which you believe deep tech could help solve. Dominic, since you have actually been having a regional experience, perhaps we could start with you first before Peg and Kimiko go into their respective countries.
Sure. So I think when, I mentioned earlier that we try to understand the demand and supply for technology. So we believe it's very important to be problem-driven solutions rather than starting from the innovation, but what is the problem that this innovation is solving? And when we look at ASEAN and beyond, maybe aside from Indonesia, a lot of the markets are relatively small. So it's really important to be looking beyond the border and looking at, okay, if this deep tech, if it's to scale, and there's going to be a lot of investment R&D in this, and it's going to take time to get to market, can it solve problems across multiple markets? Can we aggregate demand? And so that's always the pain point, the starting premise when we analyze business models. Our first fund is focused on climate, the challenges of climate change across the regions. I think when you mentioned those 5 areas, of course, it cuts across different areas, such as energy usage, how do we power the cities we live in, the agricultural food systems. So we believe there's a big role for deep tech and technology in trying to, for example, reduce post-harvest losses in production. I think there's about 30% of food production goes to waste from when produced from the farm to the table. How can we reduce that, all the waste? How can we drive deep tech solutions in the circular economy to recycle some of that? And then there's also the wider, we're also interested not just in efficiency, but also inclusiveness. How can we benefit all communities from the growth that we get in ASEAN? And even related to climate, we find that a lot of communities don't even have access to basic insurance. So in agriculture, a lot of communities, their cash crops are not insured. I think 95% of production is not yet insured. And yet with a lot of the deep tech around blockchain and AI driven solutions, I think increasingly we're seeing that there are business models now that can enable wider communities and groups to benefit from even basic insurance. So these are some of the areas that I think we hope to see impact. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic. And we definitely would revisit your thought on inclusiveness and how the growth in the region should benefit as many people as possible in a minute. And we definitely agree with your sharing about areas such as energy, environment, climate change, and food waste over there. Peg, do you see these similar areas of needs in Thailand from your work at the NIA?
Well, if we take a look on Thai perspective, the Global Innovation Index this year has shown some specific key elements regarding to deep tech investment in Thailand. First, we are ranking #1 in the world on gross expenditure research and development financed by business. By ratio, it doesn't mean that we invest a lot of money, but by ratio, we are talking about 80% of investment in technology is based on corporate. In that sense, Thai corporates now are working very actively on startup ecosystem buildings, investment, and also deep tech recently. The second one, we are ranking #9 in high tech net export and also market capitalization #10. So in that sense, I think in terms of deep tech-led investment, the big firms in Thailand, large national corporations already take a lead regarding to their own business. That's why it is very difficult for us to specify on some specific areas of deep technologies. We have quite a few number of large companies in Thailand, ranging from energies, material, medicals, and also banking sectors. They are already have their own corporate venture capital arms and started invest in specific deep technology venture. But at the same time, you can see that our research and technology organization, particularly on space, they are starting to have a consortium. They call it themselves as space consortiums. They're trying to doing a deep technology business initiatives on satellite and also space economy. So in that sense, I think the ecosystem of so-called deep technology investment in Thailand at this moment being led by local large corporations and research technology organization. Our challenges lies on building up enough capacities to have a new breed of deep tech startup. We have quite a few number of startups, but they are not that technology oriented yet. You may know that we have a very capable large corporates in banking, in service, and in hospitality, but now it's already hit the country hard. Fortunately, for the past 3 or 4 years, this specific company, they already start to invest abroad in Western Americas or even in Israel and in Europe. They start to acquire some deep technology companies of their own. So I would say that in the case of Thailand, we heavily rely on corporate venture for the past 3 years, and it's quite amazing that we have some key ingredients on their own corporate venture capital, but not yet from the size of supply. I'm talking about universities or from research technology we just started.
Thank you, Peg. And before we move to Kimiko with the same question, I just want to delve a bit deeper into what Peg has just shared with us about the significant role that corporates and their investment activities have played in developing deep tech in Thailand. So Peg, your role at the Thai government, what do you see that to be the case in order to work with this corporate and startup ecosystem? What would be the main key role that you see for the Thai government in this landscape then?
Yes, this is very good questions. As the national governments already facing so-called difficulties on utilizing our research facilities. In a regional science park and also a pilot plant that we heavily invest in the region, but we haven't got enough corporate and startup company to utilize it. In the case of deep technologies, our key role is to act as a bridge between research facilities that own, billion US dollars facilities all around the countries from the north to the south, and allows the corporate that's already decided to invest in deep technologies to utilize it and to maximize it when we have a lot of time slot left. This is our main concern. That's why we comes up with the ideas of deep technology regionalization for corporate working with our research and technology organization all around the countries. And we open to our neighboring country too, but let's see.
Yep, let's see. And now that brings us to what Kimiko will have to share about her thoughts on Vietnam's needs areas where deep tech can play a role. And Kimiko, you should also add on to whether the corporate sector in Vietnam is playing as significant a role as the corporate players in Thailand that Peg has just shared with us.
Sure, thank you. So I think that in Vietnam, what we are facing is like the problems of deep tech in general is still like a very vague definition. And I think like last year, even when SGInnovate came into sign an MOU with the Ministry of Planning and Investment in Vietnam, probably they didn't even have an idea where we are going in terms of the strategy. So we have been like involved as the expert, we have been involved with the national digital strategy for the next 10 years. And sadly, I think that in the whole like very thick book, we see a lot of industry 4.0, we see a lot of the name for AI, blockchain, and so on, but there's none mentioning about like deep tech. So I think that in the way like deep tech technologies, still in Vietnam, we have some kind of applications here and there, but it's used purely as like the tools to solve some of like the emerging problems. But like even the government or like the big corporates, even like when I came into Vingroup and we were having kind of like an innovation challenge or platform, when I mentioned like, okay, let's have like a whole category dedicated to deep tech, like I have a very hard time to explain or convince that this is actually a separate category with like different criteria and so on. So I think that in a way, when I defined the evolution of startup, I would say there are three main ways of evolution. The first wave is like 20 years ago when we first have the internet, and then like it's all based on the infrastructure of the internet and like the .com companies. But then the second wave started with Uber and a lot of like platform economies like Uber, Grab, all of these connecting people, innovating business models, but still like based on the platform of existing like internet and online environment. So the third wave of bringing into these new platforms, like if you bring into like new technology, like new biotechnology or new materials, it's a whole platform for you to play around with the applications. So people haven't think about the third wave startup as like the third wave platforms coming in different forms, but in a way they are still asking about like the specific use case or applications. So in Vietnam, I think that our focus from like the five topics that you just mentioned, like our top priority is becoming like the one of the manufacturing destinations. Now with the US and China trade toward Vietnam has like a very good opportunities to rise as like the manufacturing, because we already have the workforce. And of course, like the reskilling workforce is also one of the key that we want to address, because like for now, people are thinking of the mindset that we have a young population, but I think it's not going to be true anymore in the next 10 years. So for now, if we look at 2015, our medium average age is 30.5, but now this year is already 32.5, and in the next 5 years it's 34.6. So it's not that different from the other countries in Asia anymore, right? So what we are going to do in the next 5 years, that like upskill and preparing for that future wave of the workforce. And of course, like the green and climate change is also one of the concerns, but I haven't seen any real, priorities in terms of the initiative in this. Specifically in the corporate sector, I think luckily I work for Vingroup, which is one of the leading conglomerates, and they are very, progressive in the thinking for sustainable development. But I do not see that kind of trend across other corporates in Vietnam. So for example, in Vingroup, 2 years ago, we start to rebrand and also restructure our whole corporate. Instead of being like a leading real estate company, it becomes like a leading technology and industry company and service company. So in this industry part, we build like the biggest manufacturing firm for automotive industry and for smartphones industry. That's the preparation for the next 5 or 10 years to come. For other corporates, I think it's more in they are watching out the opportunities in the market, but I haven't seen any, drastic move. No one is willing to, scratch their current business plate and then like rewriting for the future.
Thank you very much, Kimiko. What you share actually brings back some fond memories that we have had in Vietnam, doing things with you and with the Ministry of Planning and Investment in Hanoi during the summit on investment. So what Dominic, Pat, and Kimiko have shared with us cover the main area of needs that can be summarized as climate change related challenges in energy, in food production, the space economy that is coming up very excitingly in Thailand, or how Vietnam is aspiring to be the new manufacturing hub of the region. At the same time, from what all of you have shared, there are a lot of barriers to how Southeast Asia as a whole could actually realize this promise of deep tech, from a small market size that requires regional expansion for scale, as Dominic alluded to the issue of low utilization of R&D facilities in Thailand, or the general level of awareness about deep tech in Vietnam and the corporate culture that Kimiko touched on. So my next question, which I'm sure is on the minds of our attendees right now as well, is whether you still believe that Southeast Asia has what it takes to realize this promise of deep tech, to deploy deep tech to benefit our future economy and society, and what are some of the future factors that your organization see that could help with such an economic reality where ASEAN can deploy deep tech more effectively? What it is that your organization could do or are already doing to support the development of deep tech? Dominic, once again, I would like to start with you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Tuan. So I think maybe let's, just start off by looking at I agree with Kimiko that, when you mention deep tech and you talk to different people, and there's still not a common understanding sometimes about what is deep tech. There's sometimes a misunderstanding. So let's start first with basically asking ourselves some of the characteristics of deep tech and why this type of technology finds it difficult. So typically they tend to be more capital R&D intensive to begin with. And often, not always, but there's some hardware involved in that science. And there's also often a lag between when that product is developed at the R&D phase to getting to market at scale. And if you look at the existing funding available in the market, often there is a trend of more and more corporate VCs coming into the region. But generally speaking, a lot of the VC funding that we see is not what we'd call patient capital. They look for a return quicker and to exit within a certain period. So sometimes it's quite hard to fund these types of technologies and to be patient enough to take it to the market. And so there's definitely a very important role to play for both public and private funding in this space. But having said that, I mean, talking about it from ADB Ventures perspective, we cannot wait 5-10 years to have impact, right? We're looking for impact here now today. And so when we define or look at deep tech, actually often the types of deep tech that we look at or exploring, investing or supporting, maybe they've actually sometimes been around a few years. So they would be considered very deep tech a few years ago, but they've already gained some traction, maybe in a more developed ecosystem market, which could be Singapore or here, or even America or Europe, but they've yet to penetrate and scale across a wider geographic area. And that's often to do with cost. Cost of technology often drops over time. The basic core tech behind that deep tech, whether it's computing power, cost of developing sensors, etc. So, I think we all have a role, from AI, NIA to the corporates like Vingroups to the funders, but we're coming in at slightly different stages in the journey of this deep tech solution, from the lab to the final deployment at scale. We typically would come in a little bit later when there's a bit more traction, but we appreciate also that when a deep tech or a company works with, say, a Vingroup for the first time, and you're trying to validate that solution in a new market, it's not easy. The startup hasn't yet had the track record. Vingroup's taking a chance on that company. So we ourselves have slightly different products and offerings to support companies at different stages. We'll have the equity investment, but that's more at the tail end when we've seen traction. We also have other instruments that for example, we have a program called the Seed Program, where we may look to provide some targeted grant funding first to validate and deploy a solution in a new market, and then have the option to convert and invest in that company a bit later. But even then, when you provide those types of targeted grants, we're still probably looking at companies that have maybe proven in another market like a Singapore and maybe is looking to expand out. For us to fund something that's still at the ideation R&D phase, that's not for us, but it may be for other types of corporates of R&D, deep pockets or government. So what I'm saying is that, you know, there's a role really for everyone, and we have to look at the whole timeline of that journey of a deep tech and who's coming in at what stages. And it all has to fit together so that a deep tech at every step of the way has the support they need and the networks they need to scale.
I definitely echo what you shared about the importance of patient capital as well as this support to these deep tech companies at various stages over there, Dominic. When we started our work at SGInnovate, I think that was also one of the key gaps in the market. And it's good to say that to date, SGInnovate has actually managed to build up a vibrant and active enough VC circle or alliance of about 20 plus such investors that focus on the deep tech startups in the region. So that is something that I thought would represent a growth opportunity for the region in terms of deploying and developing deep tech solutions. Kimiko, Dominic makes a lot of references to how Vingroup could actually also be an important stakeholder as a corporate partner in this journey. What do you see from your various roles so far, which are many, are the main enablers for deep tech to be successfully scaled and deployed in market? And how do you see corporates and startups should work well together, better together?
Well, I think that like the biggest barrier is always about the language differences. It's not about English or Vietnamese language differences, but in terms of the language of the business owners and the language of like the deep tech founders, which like usually they are the scientists, right? And as the corporates, I think not only on behalf of Vingroup, but because we act as also like the tech scouting partners for some of the leading corporates before, like when I was in Yellow Blocks. So I think like the major criteria for judging, like usually like the corporate partners, they are not looking specifically for what kind of technology. They are looking like they are thinking in parts of, okay, I want to solve this problem and this is my timeline. And the risk that I'm willing to take is in terms of like the investment and the return on investment. Whereas like when we talk to the startup, usually we like the corporate will get very confused because like with the same set of problem, when they meet the blockchain guy or meet the AI guy, like usually like separate group of people, they will be convinced like in different directions. And in the end, they cannot choose anything because it's not a tailor-made or like how to say, it's the same problems, but like the product owner, usually they will say, okay, with this problem, you have to solve using blockchain, like totally. And this is my current product. And sometimes like they lack a step of doing like, you know, what I call the localization between like this product and like what it matched to our enterprise solution that we are looking for. So we need a kind of like the facilitator in terms of, I think that the role that Dominic and ADB is playing in terms of like verifying and, you know, like structuring this kind of set of problem. And for example, for Vingroup, for VinFast, we want to build like the next generation of smart cars, right? And of course, like it's impossible to look for the solutions only from Vietnam or from any single countries. And so we have a call out for, okay, start up with the technology that can help us with the autonomous driving, let's say. And then we receive very, very different like pitch deck. And sometimes it's like the pitch deck that they sold to the investors. But as the corporate partners, what we expect is not like we are not the investor. We are like the partners in terms we are willing to pay for your service. We are willing to be the first one to use your service. And maybe we are the first one to test out or experiment that one also. But what we need is a clear, you know, the presentation that match our criteria. And sometimes like the product owner falls into the trap of talking too much about their product instead of what their product can bring to life for the business. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kimiko. In fact, that is something that I do believe as well. Entrepreneurs should be more careful about when to speak the right language with corporates and another right language with VC partners over there. And that brings me to Peg. Peg, you were sharing a lot about Thailand's successes in the Global Innovation Index recently. Do such high recognition of various factors in Thailand make you more optimistic about Thailand's successful deployment of deep tech in the near future? And what factors out there do you think would support Thailand in that journey?
Well, I think because Thailand, we already recognize that we already embarking for silver economy. We have aging populations in terms of ratio quite similar to Singapore. We already a very old country. So in that sense, medtech now we are approaching for so-called long distance and remote medical systems or telemedicine. The problems lies on the rules and regulation. It's not mainly about investments or technology as such. Why? Because if you take a look on both publications and also the ranking in terms of medical service in the countries, not only Thailand, but also in Singapore too. We are the region that's very capable on hospitalities and also medical service. But in fact, in Thailand, the deep tech challenges lies on how the government develop their own so-called paradigms and also the way they think about the new technology that they are not familiar with. Why? Because we are ranking number 113 on rules and regulation for innovation from 131 countries. So you see that this is not the red tape, but the way the rules and regulations plays on innovation. And I believe it's not only Thailand, but also for the rest of Southeast Asia as well. We keep talking about deep technology, keep talking about investment. At the end of the day, the government has two roles: promotion and regulate. We, as a National Innovation Agency, we are in the rooms of promotion. We are not regulators. That's why you see that it's quite easy to promote someone to invest and working on startups and deep technologies. Why it's very difficult for us to convince regulators to change their own mindset. So in that sense, I think this is the way we move forward on innovation rules and regulation. And the second one is on the end of labor-intensive jobs in the region. I believe it's not only subscribed in Thailand, but also in the rest of Southeast Asia and even in emerging market all around the world that Industry 4.0 will turn the table around. The labor-intensive job will be missing. Talking about millions of jobs that used to be for the labor-intensive countries. Now it's no exist. You can buy a robot and you can have fabless facilities anywhere in the world. So in that sense, this will affect a lot of our global value chain in the region. That's why industry techs and also deep technologies on manufacturing is very important for Southeast Asia to keep pace on global value chain. And that's already an impact in Thailand. And also the trade war that's turned to be tech war. Now we have two sides of a coin. Which country you are going to possess their own future deep technologies? We are in the region that we cannot work in isolation and cannot work alone. So we need to work together. So that Southeast Asia can be a region of deep technology enterprising. I believe that the large corporation, not only in Thailand, but also in Philippines, in Indonesia, or even in Malaysia or Singapore, or even in Vietnam, start to have enough money to invest on deep technologies. And that is the new phenomenon for the region, that we have a very capable corporate VC working in the whole region. And the last one, I believe that the old paradigm regarding to working on research triangle. Today we're talking about deep technology, startup and even investment. We cannot subscribe the old paradigm, so-called research triangle, universities, private sectors and government. Now you have a different set of government agencies like business, like Enterprise Singapore, like National Innovation Agency, that's purely working on innovation and investment, working with research agencies and trying to make it as a new business opportunity. So this is a new paradigms of a private and public partnership as well. So I see quite a few number of evolution before the COVID-19, but the COVID-19, I perceive it as an acceleration and a blessing in disguise, because when we have a lockdown, the medtech and deep technology medtech industry in Thailand prosper a lot because of the lockdown. That's why medtech startup investment in Thailand now, they're quite success. And the later one is about energy, because we can no longer rely on so-called traditional energies. And the biggest energy enterprise in Thailand happen to be the biggest company in Thailand as well. So in that sense, I think we need to take a look on the way we are shifting toward a new paradigm of innovation development in the region.
Thank you very much, Peg. You brought up many good points that I think well encapsulate our topic on what makes us positive about the future of deep tech in ASEAN, including things from patient capital investment to corporate openness to working with startups to rules and the role of rules and regulations, as well as regional collaboration to make ASEAN as a whole and not just individual countries in this technology cold war that the world is seeing today. There is one particular question from a member of the audience, Jun Meng, on the role of regulations that I want to have your further thoughts on. So many a times, innovation and use cases actually progress faster than regulation. And we see that in Singapore as well, where a lot of innovations in health actually may or may not be already considered in the current existing framework. How do you think the government sector, who are supposed to regulate, who are supposed to promote, could actually do a better job in keeping up with the fast pace of innovation? Pat, perhaps we'll start with you, and Dominic and Kimiko, please feel free to share in your insights on this question on regulation as well.
Now the magic word for the governments, we think about sandbox. When you're talking about deep technologies or so-called heavy investment, and we haven't got a rules and regulation, the government start to think about sandbox. We started to have a fintech sandbox, but it's not initiated by the government. It's initiated by Bank of Thailand. That is why I think sandbox is not magic word. Sandbox is a kind of the key that we allow them to open to the door of a new frontier. That's why I think when we allow someone to test, and I think Singapore, you have the case of unmanned vehicle as well. That's the government's work as a so-called sandbox platform. That's one key element of the first stage of recognition on new technology. But new technology come with a new activities and new way of thinking on the flows and also on the service design. Why I said service design? Because we are moving from industrialization into a post-industrialization world. We are living in the urban cities. That's why service design is very important for deep technologies, because you need to have some kind of insurance that the emerging technology won't go wrong. So in that sense, you need to come up with the trust development, and trust. It's not come from, definitely it's not come from sandbox. It's come from the personal relationship and also ecosystem that they have trust upon it. So in that sense, it's very challenging for the government to work on rules and regulation through the sandbox, while you have a very few number of people working on ecosystem building and making trust among private sector researchers and also university or even investors. So in that sense, it needs to come together. Sandbox has a regulation tools, but you need to have a soft side on innovation culture awareness. This is my concern regarding to the things under the water.
Thanks for those candid thoughts, Peg. Dominic and Kimiko, do you face or have you had any such challenge when it comes to rules and regulations for your corporate innovation programs or for your work with startups in Vietnam?
Yes, sorry. Just very quick. Okay, sure. Well, of course, regulatory risks are something that you build in when you assess a company from an investable proposition too. So generally speaking, it's harder for companies that are right up against those frontier regulatory hurdles to also sometimes raise funds, because there's a lot of risks to whether that business model can really get across the hurdle. But what we've tried to do at the ADB is, we have a fairly unique set of relationships with regulators across the region. And of course, regulations are very specific to each industry. So fintech has their own issues. Within renewable energies, it comes down to tariffs on energy and water. And and all of these regulations are, as Dr. Praj was saying, there's no one single regulatory body that can unlock all of these. So as an example, what we did in Vietnam when I was there, now we're doing in Myanmar, through the relationship with the regulator, you talk to the regulator, you involve them, and you look at what's their policy priorities and where are they trying to evolve the fintech sandbox and regulations. But at the same time, what drives the change is the demand from the industry. So you have to involve the industry too, all the banks through the associations, and because they're the ones behind the scenes also pushing the regulators, saying, hey, we want innovation in this area. And if you take fintech as an example, in the case of Vietnam, it was very clear from the beginning. They said, we don't want disruptive technologies that's going to disrupt the industry, but we want collaborative innovation where fintechs can work with banks. And some other countries are a bit different. They're more open to disruptive technologies. So you got to understand what's the playground you can play in and what are the constraints. But at least by building that playground, then you can source and invite technologies that can come in, and they have these banks to pilot and work with, and also they have a channel with the regulator is necessary. So we've tried to do that in different industries by involving regulators where necessary, but also working with the industry and figuring out what is the playground in which realistically we can operate in the next few years. Thanks.
Kimiko, would you like to add on to that?
I really agree with Dominic, is that especially in Vietnam, like the change from the regulation, it would not come like from the startup community, but it definitely comes like from the industry, like requirements and like the surveys. So actually in Vietnam, we have different association, and it's all like as the official association, you have to be licensed and under some kind of ministry. So we have an association of financial, like banks and like association institutes, and then like association of like education. So like all of these like collected survey questions will be coming like from the industry point of view, and what is the pressing issue. I think that in this way, for the real successful case study, we would like to hear more from SGInnovate, because when I talk to Vietnamese government, actually I usually bring up like the successful case study of like how SGInnovate as the initiative of the government, but stay as like the private sector, like how you can like successfully like drive and like also encourage a lot of participation from the community. Actually in Vietnam, we also starting to have a lot of support for the tech startups in general. So I think we follow very good with the like national innovation model from Thailand and from Singapore, and we have like a dedicated like we call it 844 project, and that decree is like really supporting like the startup in general. And I think that we see a lot of positive progressive growth, but in terms specifically for the deep tech, I think it would take at least like 3 or 4 years until we have some kind of like official announcement from the government. So my question is actually like what we can do as the community and as like the independent facilitators to facilitate that growth, to prepare for the official license from the regulators.
Thank you all very much. And I
maybe,
think
sorry, Duan, just to add one quick point is, of course, there's country-specific regulations, but while ASEAN is collaborating to create a bigger market, there's also a degree of competition and experimentation happening across the market. So naturally, we're all trying to attract the best talent. So sometimes if regulations are too difficult in one country, the risk is also that the innovation will flow to another country, and then you're forced to open up anyway. So you cannot really also assess regulations in isolation country by country. You're constantly looking at what other players in the ecosystem are doing.
Yep, definitely. I think that is also why we at SGInnovate really want to engage with the region overall, not just so that we can actually facilitate and advance a more holistic deep tech regional community. The idea that Kimiko you talked about, and I think when travel is possible again, we should definitely catch up to share with each other about how things are being done in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, and across the region. We have about 10 more minutes to go, and I do still have some big topics to pick your brains on, which are being asked by the members of the audience as well. So let me go right in, and if we can just give very succinct, impactful responses, that would be incredible. We talk about regulatory challenges and various other factors that could impact companies in Southeast Asia. And Lisa has asked how, as a startup, they can plug themselves in Southeast Asian markets. So what would be your advice for aspiring deep tech innovators and entrepreneurs in the region who may not be able to scale within one specific country so that they can successfully enter the regional market? For this, Dominic, since ADB has a lot of different labs programs that you run across countries, may I start with you for your thoughts, please?
Sorry, this is Lisa's question, right? The
Yes,
first question, sorry, about there's not much talent. There is so much talent in startups and others that, okay, yeah. So, you know, for us, to be honest, we're not bothered where for all our labs programs, we're not bothered about where a company is domiciled or where the companies come from. We focus on the problem. And so generally speaking, we source innovation in different ways. One very promising way is we source through trusted co-investor relations. So we build out networks to other strategically aligned corporate VCs that may, for example, have an interest in renewable energies. We are working with other corporate VCs in the banking space interested in promoting more inclusive finance. So we have a network of corporates that we look to work with. But through the labs program specifically, when we partner with accelerators such as Plug and Play or Brink to source these open innovation, innovation can come anywhere. So there's no color there. So we kind of just look at it at what's the stage of that particular startup. Have they had some track record in their own country? So if it's a Singaporean company and they're looking to go outbound to another country, we'd be looking at, you know, the team. Do they already have demonstrated traction in Singapore? You know, have they got experience of working with some corporates? What are their networks, etc.? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then we'd be more than happy to work with a Singaporean-based tech company that's looking at going outbound to other countries. So I don't know if that answers Lisa's question. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. I think the framework of problem-driven approach will be important, and a lot of these problem areas have been highlighted by all of us today, ranging from renewable energy to food waste and manufacturing advancements and so on. Pat and Kimiko, what advice would you have for regional startups that might want to enter the Thai or the Vietnamese market? Pat, could we start with your thoughts, please?
Okay, I think there are two specific things. The first one is on the roles of corporate venture capital in Thailand. They are actively engaged with not only regional startups, but also the rest of the world. So in that sense, when we are talking about deep technologies, opportunity is not in the countries or region, it's the global opportunities. In that sense, you can see that, for example, for food tech startups, we run accelerator with the biggest tuna exporter in the world. When we're talking about the biggest exporter in the world, they share more than 50% of tuna export in the world. So in that sense, yeah, they're willing to invest in deep technology in food tech, but also they would like to share their own IP and also their own market intelligence for the high potential food tech startups all around the world. So in that sense, you can see that when we think about Bangkok or Chiang Mai as a hub of deep technology in the countries, we think it globally. So in that sense, the corporate VC would like to see the opportunities all around the world, but not only in the region. But we would like to work closely with the regional first, The second one is on the roles of the government that we support smart visa for startup and also investor, that we provide 4-year smart visa for startup that would like to start working with the corporate. So in that sense, we tend to work closely with corporate than so-called the local universities and also the small groups of venture capital, because it's just in the beginning. The corporate in Thailand can offer 3 things: investment, market intelligence, and their own IP. This is their own strength.
I'm sure that a lot of our members of the audience will want to connect with Thai corporates after this event today, Pat. And Kitiko, what are your thoughts on startups entering Vietnam? And I also want to add on another question from the audience, Lim, on how do you think in this current economic situation, you as a corporate would still be able to make a case for deep tech investment or working with startup because of economic challenges, and your bottom lines need to be taken care of first before you can think about investing for the long term. What are your thoughts on this as well?
Okay, thank you. I will take it very quickly because I think most part already covered by Dominic and Perk. But actually, I insist, like if any startup who want to go enter the new markets as in Vietnam or any other country, they need to like really be successful in their like very strong market first, or like have the first successful case study. And then like the second point is that, as Dominic mentioned, we have like an underlying competition between different countries to like attract the best talents. So actually when you go to Thailand, talk to Perk. When you go to Vietnam, you can go to like, there's the Ministry of Science and Technology, and we have like a whole department dedicated to like, bring market access to new startup of the region who want to come into Vietnam. So I think that like by going as a flock or as a herd, you have the community, and like you go as the batch of different startups to solve maybe the same problem with the industry, like manufacturing industry, or you solve like the food problem. Then like if you go as like the pack of services or solutions, it's like much better to address like the whole food association or like corporates related to that. And of course, like the second advice is also do your homework, do the research, and see like whether as we have like very public information about the top 100 corporates in Vietnam in terms of like the market valuation on the stock exchange, right? So if they can do like the research and like pinpoint like maybe top 5 corporates that they want to approach, they can also go very actively during that way. So my point is that as a startup, you have to think also as the investor. So investor of your opportunities. So go invest in different ways of approaching, and like to test out like which way is more efficient and to compete with that. And addressing the point about corporate investment, actually 3 years ago, we also started our ventures, Vin Ventures and also Vintech City, with much focus in investment of like the platform technology such as AI and so on. And then we do the spin out, the spin off as Vin AI and Vin Brain. So different solutions that also come from that program. And I think our focus as the corporate is not as like the different VCs that we want to see the profits in terms of the M&A and so on, but more in like what kind of solution we can apply directly to our sustainable development of the whole like set of services. So in terms of like the COVID time or economic downturn, actually we will not structure it as the investment collaborations or relationships, but it's more like the like investment as the investment of opportunities. We are willing to pay for their service and to test out or experiment, and also like to develop or to invest in the building the team. But like it could be like the co-o of the IP. So I think it's more like different ways of investment that we are looking for. Different relationship, yeah.
Definitely, I think ASEAN economies are still very relationship-based in that way, and startups and entrepreneurs need to make use of their networks in a sense. So Pat, Dominic, and Kiniko, we have actually had a very, very good conversation with you on the deep tech economy in ASEAN, from the areas of needs to the challenges and the barriers and the enablers, so that startups and investors and corporates could work well together as a region. I want to end off our conversation today going back to the very first point that Dominic brought up on inclusive growth. Right? How it is, we know that deep tech could result in negative outcomes as well. Peg talked about potential job losses earlier, and we know that with deep tech, there could be a higher degree of digital divide. And our audience is also asking about how the associated economic rewards from deep tech innovation could be distributed more equitably. That's a question by Yining from HP. I want to end off our conversation for your thoughts on how startups, governments, investors, corporates could help ensure that the benefit from deep tech innovation could be distributed to as many people as possible, and how we can work to limit the downside of deep tech as unintended consequences. Perhaps Dominic, you mentioned this inclusiveness subject. Could we start with you as we end off the event, please?
Yeah, thanks. I think that we have to always start off, especially for B2B types of business models, where the startup is essentially reaching to the wider beneficiaries through corporate partners. There has to be a business case, short-term or long-term. You know, you cannot, it's not sustainable, and you cannot force upon a deep tech for good with a corporate partner if there's nothing in it for the corporate partner in the long term. There has to be value creation for all sides. So, you know, I think earlier, like NIA was making the example that there are large energy companies in Thailand, for example, where their traditional business of using coal-powered fossil fuels is a dead end. They know it's a dead end. So they're forced to pivot and strategically invest more and more in renewables for more cleaner investment. They're doing this for business reasons, not just for a CSR. And likewise, sometimes when you work with certain types of financial institutions and banks, they're looking to penetrate the wider SME market or to the smallholder, because the increased computing power is allowing them to make decisions real time and to aggregate big data so that they can provide services at a profit to lower income groups that they couldn't make before. But there's always a business case. And so I think, you know, that's where I see that, you know, deep tech over time can do good. It's allowing for new business models to reach the masses that previously we couldn't reach. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And Pat, what are your thoughts on the inclusive benefits that we can harness from deep tech to as many people as possible?
I think at this moment there are two routes of innovation from the COVID-19. The first one is on to maximize profits in a traditional business model, both for very high potential startup and also corporate that they can enjoy their own high growth in the time of crisis. But when we're talking about a time of crisis, there are quite a few number of momentum that we need to think about deep technology startups initiative. It's not only about pandemic. We still have a lot of problems regarding to climate change, and also quite a few number of human-centric challenges like mass migrations of population, or even the economic migration in ordinary terms in the region, but not only in Southeast Asia, but for the rest of the world as well, particularly in Africa, in Latin America. So in that sense, I think when we're talking about deep technology for goods, it doesn't mean that we cannot subscribe the idea of startup pivot into this kind of challenges. They have quite a few number of articles talking about this kind of ideology. That's they just subscribe the idea of the deep technology startup working on maximizing profits, but into the new specific setup, so-called the global challenge. And I think this going to be a new frontier that deep technology startup can work with corporate, and not only corporate, but also a lot of global philanthropic fund as well.
Yep, we really like the idea of having global challenge innovations to enable startups to work with corporates and philanthropists and venture impact investors around the world have had. And Kimiko, what would you think about harnessing the potential of deep tech for economic and social good there?
Well, in my opinion, I think that if we really understand the definition of deep tech and the, how to say, original intention of deep tech startup founder, how to solve the problems like scalability and reach out or improving the life of millions of people, right? So if we look at that ultimate purpose and we look at the whole value chain of like deep tech investment, deep tech implementing, and then like scaling up, actually in the first phase, it might sound that it's too distributed to like the very advantaged people, technology, high tech company or like investment firm will get like the first reward in terms of like betting their investment and so on. But if we look at that not as the whole parts of the journey, but as the whole destination, actually, I think at the end of the value chain, the ultimate purpose is always to bring out new scientific discovery to improve the lives of billions of people. That's the ultimate purpose. So in the way, I do not think much about like the first phase, because like our first phase is always about how to encourage more and more people to think of new ideas and to implement that or experiment that fastly enough for us to have like a pool of idea. I think the challenge right now is that when we host any kind of like challenge or innovation challenge or deep tech research, we see too many familiar faces. Because like the problem is that even like for the talents in Vietnam, we have a lot of talented people, but the problem is about we have too many opportunities to work on something else rather than to work on something very long term and like, you know, beneficial for too many people. So we got caught in the daily operation and daily thinking of solving like daily problem rather than like, you know, very big problem that, you know, require maybe 5 years or 10 years of sitting in your own room and no one knows about you, but then in the end it all pays off. So I think that the problem is about in integrating the people to really think about the real original purpose of deep tech and understand truly about the goodwill of deep tech.
Well, this has been a very, very interesting conversation for me personally, and I'm sure for the members of the audience who have joined us as well. My personal takeaways would be that for deep tech to flourish in ASEAN or anywhere in the world, we need to be focusing first on the problems. We need to be able to devise new business models that can help to not just achieve profit objectives, but to solve the problems that the company set out to do based on the intention at the start, like what Kimiko mentioned, and going for the long run. And of course, there are enablers in Southeast Asia that could help to achieve this better, from the investment capacity from players such as ADB, SGInnovate, and others, to the rules and regulations facilitation that government players can do, and also the corporate investment in this space with the setup of dedicated departments working with startups around the world. I think we are in this for the long run, at least from SGInnovate. And so we will continue to have a lot more of this engagement and conversations with you and various ASEAN stakeholders. I would now like to thank each and every one of you, Peg, Dominic, and Kimiko, for an excellent conversation today. And I would also like to thank our attendees who have stayed on with us and have been asking questions and engaged in the conversation. We will be sending out a recording of today's event after this as well, so that everyone can just take a look at that. And do feel free to engage with any one of us via LinkedIn, via email, as you see necessary, so that we can continue the conversation. And with that, I would like to close off the event today. And thank you all once again for staying in with us. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.